What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and I am coming to you here with a new type of video for the channel. So, this is going to be a card review video. There was recently a live stream with Fantasy Flight Games where they showed us a lot of new cards. We had, I believe, 12 new cards previewed on stream. So, I'm just going to go through those cards and let you know what my thoughts are. I don't always do like review videos or anything like that. I shared my thoughts on the cards that I had as spoilers myself, but I think when it comes to reviewing cards, I haven't been keeping up with every single preview and doing that, but we got enough of a chunk of them all at once that it seemed like it might be interesting to just go through the new cards and see what we think. So yeah, let's get to it. So I have SWUDB open here, swudb.com. That's a site that has just a database of all the cards and so on. It's going to be, and also has some deck building features. Unofficial fan site, Fantasy Flight, I think, is going to have some official content along those lines in the future, but doesn't have it implemented yet. So, yeah, let's get right to it. We're going to lead off with the Bounty Hunter crew. So, this is a 6 cost 4/4. So, immediately what I think when I see that is that these stats are way below the curve. I'm going to have to talk about this later, but there's this idea of the curve, which is basically the value you should be getting for your stats. And or the stats you should be getting for your cost rather. And paying 6 for a 4/4 is a very bad rate. However, we see there are some powerful. I want to stress though, you can have a unit that's below the curve stats wise, but has really good abilities to make up for it, and that might be what we see here with the Bounty Hunter crew. So ambush, after you play this unit, it may ready and attack an enemy unit. Really good keyword. Already means that this is going to be able to get some favorable trades. And when played, you may return an event from a discard pile to its owner's hand. This is really good. So when I'm looking at this, what I see is 6 cost is expensive for these stats. The ambush is likely going to allow you to defeat a unit when it comes into play or deal substantial damage. And when played, you may return an event from a discard pile to its owner's hands. That means that this is going to, I think, very often be card advantage and sometimes really big card advantage. So if you play this, so card advantage is this idea about who has more cards, more cards available to use. In general, card advantage is a favorable thing to have in this sort of game. But just to give a more specific example, so let's say the bounty hunter crew ambushes in, defeats an enemy unit, uh, that would be and remains alive. So that would be 1 card advantage because you used your card, you defeated an enemy card, and your card is still around. Then additionally, you get a second piece of card advantage because you returned an event from a discard pile to its owner's hand. And then if the opponent plays like an open fire or something to defeat it, that actually means that your bounty hunter crew took 3 cards, took 3 cards to defeat and only cost you 1 card. So that's actually that's really favorable. If you can get it to do that much value, that's really favorable. And as a result, I think this is potentially a strong card. The high cost does make me a little skeptical, but it is in cunning, which runs often runs a lot of events, so you're very likely to get value from this when played. If you play it without having an event in discard, it's probably pretty bad. Just because at that point you're paying 6 for 4/4 ambush. That's really uncompetitive with cards like Agent Callus or Bosk. So Agent Callus is 5 for 4/4 ambush with substantial upside. Bosk is 5 for 4/5 ambush with substantial upside. Even the Syndicate lackeys are, I believe, 5 for 5/4 ambush. That's gonna look a lot better than the Bounty Hunter crew if you're not returning an event. Okay. One other thing I'll note is this is common, which means that it could definitely see play in limited. Generally speaking, rarity does not matter for constructed competitive play. People who are competitive, people who are like really competitive, at least on a high level, will have whatever cards they want in their deck, no matter what the rarity is. And so rarity I think you should basically just pretend rarity doesn't exist. When you're thinking about like the highest level of competitive play, that doesn't mean like, oh, everyone's going to have totally maxed out decks at every local store event. That's not true. But in high level competitive play, rarity mostly doesn't matter. And if it does matter, that's actually a problem with the game. So like in Flesh and Blood TCG, for instance, I know there have been at least some cards that are sometimes not played because of rarity, but that those cards are incredibly rare. Like it's like imagine if like a showcase in this game was a card that was playable in your deck. And I think not everyone would have them even competitively. So I personally, so there's a card called Heart of Fyendal. It is a competitive card in at least some builds. It also costs more than $200. And it used to be, I think it used to maybe even be more expensive than that. And when I say it costs more than $200, that's in its cheap form. This card is just hugely expensive. And, there was a period where I thought it was correct to have this in my deck, and I didn't have it because I didn't have the physical card, and I thought it was ridiculous to spend $200 on a card. I later actually won one as a prize for winning an event, which is good because I doubt that I would have bought it earlier. But unless we get that kind of really crazy level of like card value and rarity in Star Wars Unlimited, I think rarity is mostly not going to matter, at least in high level competitive play. However, rarity does matter a lot in limited because it really influences what cards are available in limited. So legendary cards, for instance, are not common, are not going to be super influential in limited because they aren't going to be as prevalent. Whereas cards that are on the lower ends of the rarity spectrum are going to be things that you have a much higher chance to see in limited formats, that is draft and sealed. Okay, so now we're going to move on from the Bounty Hunter crew. Let's go to our next card from this preview, which is Power Failure. So this is a two-cost event. Defeat any number of upgrades on a unit. So the first thing that I want to emphasize when I look at this Power Failure card is shields and experience are upgrades. So if you play a Power Failure on an opposing unit, you can not only remove cards like Jedi Lightsaber, Entrenched, other upgrades that are actually played on the card normally, you also get to remove any number of shields, any number of experience on that unit. So that sounds pretty good. Now the problem with this is that it costs two. I had actually talked about wanting this exact card effect, but my hope was that it was going to cost 0 or 1. At two, it is expensive. Um, because so there's a three-cost ship. In fact, we're going to let's bring this up here. There's a three-cost ship, the Disabling Fang Fighter, which is a three-cost 3/2. When played, you may defeat and upgrade. So it costs one more than Power Failure, and you also get a 3/2 ship. Um, Power Failure is, in my opinion, not very competitive with Disabling Fangfighter because in most cases, units are probably not going to have a ton of upgrades. And so playing the Disabling Fangfighter to defeat one upgrade is still going to take out that Jedi lightsaber that entrenched on your unit, preventing it from attacking, and at the same time is going to develop your board with a powerful body. So for that reason, I think Power Failure ends up being expensive for what you get, especially since, defeating upgrades on a unit in the best case will actually remove the unit because you'll remove upgrades that are keeping it alive. But but in general, I think two is expensive. I think two in a card is expensive for this effect when you can play three in a card and remove their most valuable upgrade already. And Disabling Fangfighter is not always a main deck card, often more of a sideboard type thing, at least presently. So ultimately, I don't really think too much of Power Failure. Now, could be a reasonable sideboard card. If you have a deck, if someone has a deck that has a lot of experience token generation, so maybe they're playing Tarkin and they also have cards like General Tag, tie advanced, other stuff that gives experience, and maybe they're playing academy training, fallen lightsaber and stuff on top of that. Yeah, this could be good. I've definitely seen situations where a unit gets really loaded up. Um, you also see people sometimes loading upgrades onto their leader because leaders are less vulnerable to removal. So this could be a good counter to that. I've seen games where there's like a Leia who has academy training and is buffed by a X-wing or whatever, or a wing leader rather. This card isn't without its uses, but it's expensive for what you get, given that for one more resource, you could remove their most important upgrade and get a decent unit in space as well. I ultimately don't think this is likely going to see that much constructed play, except perhaps as a sideboard card, or if we see a really upgrade heavy meta for some reason. So those are my thoughts on Power Failure. We will move on to Jedi Agitator. This is a two-cost 2/1 Saboteur. And on attack, if you control a leader unit, deal 2 damage to a ground unit or a base. So again, we're going to look at the curve. Two-cost 2/1 is really bad. It's actually terrible. Um, so two cost is normally going to get you 5 points of stats. So we can look at a 2-cost unit like Lothal Insurgent is a 3/2 or Viper Probe Droid is a 3/2. Um, so two for a we also have units like two for a 1/4, two for so two for a 1/4 regional governor C3PO, two for a 2/3 with cards like Colonel Yularen. Two for a 2/1 is really bad. Um, Now let's see what abilities this guy has to make up for it. So we have Saboteur. When this unit attacks, ignore Sentinel and defeat the defender's shields. And we have on attack, if you control a leader unit, deal 2 damage to a ground unit or a base. This on attack ability is really good in principle, but it is locked behind controlling a leader. In my opinion, these if you control a leader unit abilities are not very strong because leaders typically do not stay in play very long in this game. Now, um, that's not to say, that's not to say that they are always going to be bad. This guy is actually really high upside if you have him ready to attack when you have your leader deployed. And we might see him be relevant in like a Sabine deck, for instance, where Sabine can actually deploy very quickly. But the problem is, if this guy is relevant, he can be removed. Um, he can be removed quite easily since he only has 1 HP. So the best case I'm seeing for this right now is like, maybe you're in a Sabine deck and like your opponent is also playing aggro and like in the aggro mirror, they don't want to spend time attacking him because they're just racing. But if they don't attack him, he can cause problems either doing 4 damage with his attack, which is really good for 2, or potentially picking off one of their units. That being said, I'm overall not thrilled with this guy. It's a shame. It's like cool art and it's an interesting concept, but overall, I think the base stats are kind of too low for this to work well. Um, he's 2 points below the curve, and I don't think his abilities are strong enough to make up for it. So those are just my thoughts on the Jedi Agitator. You may disagree. We will move on to the. Oh, and one other note is he has the Rebel trait. The Rebel trait is good. So right now the best trait is probably Force. And then Rebel and Imperial are both really good traits. And there's some stuff that synergizes with Vehicle also, but a lot less. And some stuff that synergizes with Trooper, but a lot less. So I think if I were ranking the traits, it would be Force is number 1. Then we have Rebel is better than Imperial in the current card pool because Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader are better than Snowtrooper Lieutenant and TIE Advanced. Um, and Leia is probably better than Tarkin. I could go into that more, but just take my word for it for now. That, or at least, don't necessarily take my word for it, but that's my assessment. So I would say Force is the best, then Rebel, then Imperial, then probably Trooper synergy is better than Vehicle synergy right now, and then Vehicle, I guess. And now I'm worrying that there's like some good trait that I've totally forgotten to mention, and people are going to embarrass me. There is some synergy with official, but not a ton of it right now. Anyway, um, Rebel trait is, in my opinion, a quite good trait to have, but it's not enough to make this guy strong, in my view. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next unit or the next card, which is Strike True, 3-cost event tactic. A friendly unit deals damage equal to its power to an enemy unit. Single green aspect here. This card is, in my opinion, okay, so what we need to do is compare this card to Open Fire. So here's Strike True, and now let's take a look at Open Fire. Open Fire, 3-cost event tactic, single aspect red, deal 4 damage to a unit. So this is baseline. This is a good card. This card is, at least in the current meta, this card like straightforwardly sees play in a lot of decks. I think it's nice and versatile. You can do damage either to the ground arena or the space arena with it. I think it's very solid. So now we're going to look at Strike True. A friendly unit deals damage equal to its power to an enemy unit. It costs the same as Open Fire. So in order to get as much value as Open Fire, you need to have a unit on the board with 4 or more power. Or your target, maybe you have a unit that isn't as strong, but also your target doesn't need all 4 damage. So for example, if you have a Battlefield Marine, which is a 3/3, so 3 power, and you play Strike True to defeat an opposing Green Squadron A-Wing, this is something that could easily be a second turn play. The fact that you did 1 less damage doesn't actually matter because you only needed 3 damage. So in that case, Strike True and Open Fire have the same effect in practice. Strike True also scales above Open Fire in decks that have very strong units. So for instance, if I play Open Fire on like, let's say it's like turn 8 and I have Emperor Palpatine. I play Open Fire, it's still only 4 damage. I play Strike True, that Emperor Palpatine is going to deal 6 damage, and it goes even higher than that if I'm using like the big battleships let's say I play Strike True while I have Home 1 in play, that's going to be 7 damage. So Strike True has really good scaling and can actually be extraordinarily powerful if you have really big units out. Overall, I would say I think this is probably a worse card than Open Fire because Open Fire is a lot more consistent and reliable, which is worth a lot in this game. And I think in a lot of games in general, consistency can be good. But the ceiling for Strike True is higher, and I think the floor is not. So the floor for this is actually 0 because if you don't have a unit in play, this card doesn't do anything. So that's that's potentially an obstacle for sure. But I think this is actually good enough that it will probably see play even in constructed. And the reason that I say that is that right now there are some decks that really want to have more removal, but we haven't seen a ton of removal cards in this game, and this is another piece of that puzzle. So for instance, if I have red, green Leia, I did a earlier video breaking down the Sabine yellow versus Leia red matchup, in my opinion. So I think that if I'm in that matchup, I want to be controlling the opponent. And what I was finding is I actually wanted to like mulligan for open fire because open fire was the only like strong removal card for dealing with early units that I couldn't handle, especially in the space arena. Now, if I had Strike True as well as Open Fire, that's just, I've just doubled the number of removal cards that can potentially shoot down that A-Wing or whatever that's causing me problems, and I think that's actually pretty good. So I would say Strike True, this seems like a very solid card. I think it will see play in both Constructed and Draft, at least until we see more removal. This is also a card that Hera is really excited about, for reasons that are sort of complicated to explain. I think Hera Syndulla really wants to play double green, heroic doesn't have very much removal. This is a solid removal card for that deck and, another piece of the puzzle. Now, will people still be playing this in like set 5 or something? Maybe not. I don't think it's the most efficient removal in the game. It's kind of expensive and it is conditional, so it's not the best possible answer, but I do think that at least for now, it's a very solid card. All right, next up we have Traitorous. This is a 5 cost upgrade. When this upgrade becomes attached to a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less, take control of that unit. When this upgrade becomes unattached from a unit, that unit's owner takes control of it. So basically, when you play this card, you play this on an opposing unit and you gain control of it, as long as it costs 3 or less. And then if the opponent has upgrade removal and they get rid of it, they get their unit back. So as it stands, this is, I think, really, really strong. And I know this might be controversial. There's some people who have been negative on this card after it's previewed. It is expensive. But the thing is, let's look back at Strike True and Open Fire. So Strike True, 3 cost event, friendly unit deals damage equal to its power. Open Fire, 3 cost event, 4 damage to a unit. Um, so if you use Open Fire or Strike True to defeat an enemy unit, you spent 3 in a card and you got rid of their unit. Let's say that instead you use Traders. So you attach Traders to that unit. You had to spend 2 more resources, but you get basically a double the effect because not only did you remove their unit for most purposes, you also gained that unit. So if your opponent has like some small unit that's been buffed up and you play Traders and take control of it, you've actually gained a lot of value. Like even if they just have, let's say it's a 3 cost 3/4. 3/4 is on curve for a 3 cost unit. So let's say it's a 3 cost 3/4 and its text isn't relevant. If you play Open Fire and defeat that, you spent 3 to get rid of their unit. If you play Traitorous, you spent 5, you got rid of their unit, and you got a 3 cost 3/4 yourself for 2, and it's very possibly ready so it can attack this turn. That's really high value, and that is not actually the peak for this card. The peak is like, I don't know, they play Yoda and give him the Jedi lightsaber. And now that's like a huge problem unit to deal with, in terms of stats that Yoda with Jedi lightsaber is a 5/7 because he is a force unit. He can give that -2/-2 to enemy units. He can potentially defeat their leader in one shot. Really strong combination. But with Traitorous, they honestly probably can't afford to do that, or it's very risky to do it because if you take control of that Yoda, you're getting massive value. They spent 6 resources and 2 cards to get a strong upgraded unit, and you spent 5 resources and 1 card to not only remove it, but also take control of it yourself. Huge win, huge win. And People will have to start counterplaying it by not doing as many upgrade plays on these cheaper units. But right now, upgrade plays on cheaper units are very strong with cards like Wing Leader, Jedi Lightsaber, Fallen Lightsaber, Academy Training. There's a lot of situations right now where upgrading a small unit can be really good, and Traitors allows you to get huge value against your opponent if they do that. So overall, I think this card is very strong. I think it will see widespread constructed play. I know there are some people who are skeptical of it, but I personally think it's going to be really good, and I've already started deck building with it. Okay. If you disagree, feel free to share your comments. Share your comments below, point out where I'm wrong. I could see it ending up being kind of clunky. It does cost 5. Maybe it's too expensive for what you get, but I personally think it's going to end up being very strong. Okay, so next up we have the Mercenary Company, 6 cost 5/5, so below curve, but 6 cost 5/5 versus 6 cost 4/4. Those are substantially better base stats than the Bounty Hunter crew. Additionally, it also has ambush, so these cards are those two cards can be compared more directly. Has Underworld and Trooper. Underworld trait doesn't currently do anything, but might in the future. Trooper trait is currently it's somewhat useful. It works with I think Precision Fire and General Tag, both of which Precision Fire is a pretty decent card. I don't like General Tag very much, but if you have a lot of troopers, you might consider running him. So 6 cost 5/5 with ambush, so that will very likely be able to pick off an enemy unit when played and remain on the board, which is some nice card advantage. And it also has overwhelm. When attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base. So this means that this card, if you have to pick off some unit that only has 1 HP, it doesn't feel as bad as it might in other situations because your overwhelm damage will convert to the opponent's base and give them a solid hit. Overall, I think similarly to the Bounty Hunter crew, this is actually a fairly solid card. This is a fairly solid card for limited formats. At least it is a common, so it should be relatively accessible, and it can get you some good value. The problem that I have with it is that again, 6 for 5/5 ambush overwhelm, pretty good, but like I think this compares a bit unfavorably to cards like Agent Callus or Bosk, who are kind of more premier ambush options. At a lower cost, lower stats, but probably better text. Overwhelm is a pretty good ability, especially for a more aggro-focused deck where you're trying to get that damage onto your opponent's base, but 6 is quite expensive for an aggro deck. Um, Overall, I think it is, I don't think it's terrible. I think there's also even an argument that you might want to try this. I don't know for sure, but you might want to try this in some kind of Leia aggro if you want to play cards that are this expensive, because the overwhelm to deal damage to the opponent's base directly might be what you need. But overall, right now I'm not thrilled by this for constructed play. Might need some testing, but I think it's going to be more of a threat in limited. In constructed, there are just some very good cards with similar roles that I think do it better, but I could be wrong. Okay, so that's the Mercenary Company. We're going to move on to the Steadfast Battalion, 5 cost 5/5. So this is a little bit below curve um, in theory, but there are really not very many 5 cost units to base that on. So, it's a little speculative. The curve is more defined at a lower level. In general, though, I think 4 for a 4/5 is a pretty good deal. 5 for a 5/5 is not amazing. Um, However, let's continue here. 5 for a 5/5 overwhelm when attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base. On attack, if you control a leader unit, give a friendly unit +2/+2 for this phase. So, and it has trooper. It's not rebel. The art kind of looks rebel, but it's not rebel. It's just trooper. So, looking at this card, the thing that so first off, I think this is probably the best of the if you control a leader cards. I don't mean to say that it's necessarily good, but I think it is the best of the if you control leader cards. And the reason is on attack, if you control a leader, give a friendly unit +2/+2 for this phase. This does not say another friendly unit. It says a friendly unit. So you can attack with this and use its on attack to give itself +2/+2, making it a 7/7 for 5. That is actually really, really good. If you're getting this as a 7/7 with Overwhelm for 5, that is strongly above curve. ATST is a 6/7 Overwhelm for 5. It's a little worse because the +2/+2 involves temporary HP, which will go away, making the unit easier to remove. But the base, uh, the base, the base value there is very high. Now, the problem is it is an if you control a leader effect. If you control a leader effect are not very reliable because you do not necessarily control your leader for a really long time as a unit in this game. Um, a lot of the time, your opponent is going to be using removal cards and other effects to try to get your leader off the board quickly. And other leaders deploy late enough that you might play this card, and then next turn or the turn after the next turn, you're going to deploy Luke or Chewie. But before you do that, this card might get removed. So I think this is probably the best of the if you control leader units, and it's genuinely a very serious threat uh, when you have a leader. When you don't have a leader, I would say it's not very exciting for what you get. I would rather have a card like Zeb. But if you do have this while you control a leader, I think it's actually quite good. Um, so will this see constructed play? I'm skeptical. I'm not sure that it's going to be great for constructed. I'm not read enough completely, but I'm not sure. It might go well with a leader like Krennic, who has a lot of HP and is not normally considered a very high priority target, so you're more likely to be able to get the if you control a leader text. Krennic also likes the Rugged Survivors, which is another if you control a leader unit. I don't think it will see play everywhere. The lack of the rebel trait or the imperial trait or whatever is a substantial downside for this as well. But I do think it's going to be at least a somewhat interesting card, and you will have some situations where it will be unexpectedly strong. The fact that it can buff itself with its on attack ability is, I think, not immediately apparent at first glance for all players, and may give people some unpleasant surprises. Okay, uh, also, I think this is substantially stronger in limited and maybe actually quite scary in limited, where people generally have worse removal. Card quality is a little lower. The fact that it's maybe below curve is going to be less of an issue, and they're also less likely to have stuff to deal with your leader quickly. So, Steadfast Battalion, pretty interesting card. Um, yeah, let's go on to the oh, and also this works way better with the Energy Conversion Lab in general. Energy Conversion Lab works really well with a lot of cards, but it works especially well with like bigger units that have like relatively high stats, but are normally things you would have to play and then wait in order to get value out of. Energy Conversion Lab is pretty great with this, especially if you control your leader and you can do that 7/7 overwhelm ambush potentially, or give an important buff to another unit. Okay, so that's the Steadfast Battalion. Next up, Mon Mothma, Voice of the Rebellion. 2 cost 1/3. Rebel Official. When played, search the top 5 cards of your deck for a Rebel card, reveal it, and draw it. You put the other cards in the bottom of your deck in a random order. Okay, so again, we're going to look at the curve. 2 cost 1/3. That's below the curve. The curve is 2 cost 1/4. However, the when played ability will very reliably get you a card draw, which is really valuable. So a lot of heroic decks are very rebel heavy right now, especially things like Leia. So this is below the curve, but it has card advantage. The main card that I want to compare this to is C3PO. So C3PO C3PO Protocol Droid, 2 cost 1/4, so one higher point of HP, and is on curve instead of being below curve. When played or on attack, choose a number, then look at the top card of your deck. If its cost is the chosen number, you may reveal and draw it. Otherwise, leave it on top of your deck. So, of these two cards, Mon Mothma versus C3PO, Mon Mothma has worse stats and is going to be less effective at contesting the board early on. Now, you could say 1/4 is already bad at contesting the board early on. To some degree, that's true, but there are cards right now that C3PO actually deals with and remains alive that are like used in competitive decks. So a good example would be Greedo. Greedo is a 1 cost 3/1. A 2 cost 1/4 will take out Greedo and remain alive on 1 HP. Yes, Greedo might hit his when defeated top deck ability to deal 2 damage to you and defeat you anyway. But if they have let's say the Death Star Stormtrooper, this card does see some play in constructed decks. 1 cost 3/1 vanilla. So C3PO can take out the Death Star Stormtrooper and remain alive. Can often take out Greedo and remain alive. This ability only hits is like it's complicated, but I think that in general, Greedo's ability is like 40% hit chance would be very high with the types of decks that we've seen. And a lot of them would actually be substantially lower than a 40% hit chance. You would see decks that would have, maybe a 20 or 30% chance. So C3PO can more likely than not defeat Greedo and remain alive, can defeat the Death Star Trooper and remain alive. Mon Mothma trades with those units. Now, however, Mon Mothma's card draw is more reliable than C3PO's. So C3PO, unless you have some effect that allows you to see the top card of your deck, you're basically guessing, and your hit chance ends up being, again, 40% is kind of high. I've seen it above that, but like, generally you're looking at 40% or less, and that's if you're guessing correctly. Um, Mon Mothma, on the other hand, will very likely hit on decks with lots of rebels. I don't know what the actual chance is. You could use a hypergeometric calculator to determine it for a specific deck, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was like, I wouldn't be surprised if she had like a 90+% hit chance in rebel heavy builds, or at least some of them. I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. So basically, Mon Mothma and C-3PO. Mon Mothma is going to be a weaker unit, but a more reliable single card draw. C-3PO is better at fighting and has higher card draw upside if he gets to use his ability multiple times, but his ability is not very reliable. Overall, of the two, I think Mon Mothma is a better card draw source. C-3PO is a better early fighting unit. So it kind of depends on which you're most interested in. I would rather play C-3PO on turn one than Mon Mothma most of the time, I think. But in later turns, playing Mon Mothma is going to be more impactful than playing C-3PO, in my opinion. So I think there's quite a reasonable argument, I think, for playing this. I personally probably prefer C-3PO in the current meta, where aggro is very prevalent and having better early fighting stats might be crucial, especially given that you might want to be playing buffs or whatever on your on an early two drop. If you have, let's say you play C-3PO, the opponent plays Battlefield Marine. If you play Fleet Lieutenant or Wing Leader to buff C-3PO, you can have him take out that Marine. So Fleet Lieutenant allows him to take out the Marine and stay alive. Wing Leader could live either way, but he'd live with more health. Mon Mothma though does have that more reliable card draw ability. Also has Rebel and Official. There isn't really official synergy for Rebels right now, as far as I know, but there could be in the future. C-3PO is Rebel and Droid. There isn't any Droid synergy right now at all, so we'll have to see. We'll have to see where that ends up. Overall, Mon Mothma, interesting card. I currently think that I prefer C-3PO in this type of role, or in this like type of slot, which is like two cost unit that also may provide card draw. But Mon Mothma is better at the card draw than C-3PO, worse at the unit part, in my opinion. So definitely an interesting option, and one that I do intend to test in competitive in constructed play as well. Make an opening, 3 cost tactic. Give a unit -2/-2 for this phase. Heal 2 damage from your base. So this is an interesting card. It is kind of removal. It is kind of a debuff. It sort of depends on the specific situation, but in some cases, -2/-2 will be a unit defeated. So if you have a unit, if we go back to that Greedo or that Death Star Stormtrooper, -2/-2 defeats them, and heal 2 damage from your base. Once again, let's compare this to Strike True and Open Fire. So Open Fire, 3 cost, 4 damage to a unit. Make an opening -2/-2. That is worse than 4. In a lot of situations. However, it also heals your base, and in some cases, it's good enough. I personally think Make an Opening is a strong card. I have not tested it in detail yet. I think there is a chance it will end up being weaker than I think. But the thing about Make an Opening is healing damage from your base is very relevant. We're in a really aggro meta right now. And if you're trying to deal with that aggro, the ability to heal this damage from your base is actually really important. So, you know, let's say that you're playing against Sabine and the opponent has, a Lothal Insurgent or something. Make an opening will defeat a Lothal Insurgent and also heal your base. That makes it substantially better than Open Fire and likely better than Strike True in that sort of situation. Because you are not only removing their unit, you're also getting value. The fact that it gives -2/-2 also lets it pierce shields. So let's say that someone has let's say someone plays what's it called? The Crafty Smuggler, 2/2 with shielded. -2/-2 will go through the shield and defeat that unit because it has 0 HP, and will also heal your base when doing it. So that's upside. Now let's talk about downside. So downside, if they have a unit with 3 HP, and this is the only thing that you have to deal with it's not going to work. You can debuff them, but you can't remove them. Let's say that you want to combo your card with Tarkin Town. This isn't damage, so it doesn't work with Tarkin Town as I understand it. Um, so, and I'd have to look at the rules more carefully to make sure that that's true, but I think -2/-2 is not considered damage, and that unit wouldn't be considered damaged. I think you have to have actual damage tokens on you, or counters or whatever, in order to be considered damaged. But yeah, so Make an Opening, interesting card here. Um, Ultimately, I think it's one that will probably end up seeing play, at least because we have such an aggro meta. There are also some situations where the fact that it gives the opposing unit -2 power is very relevant. So let's say that your opponent has played let's say your opponent has a sentinel that's going to be able to fight your units and give you a lot of problems. Giving it that -2 power might be the difference that makes it so that other units can attack into it and live. So that, if your plan to deal with the unit was to play one card to damage it and then attack with one of your units to defeat it, make an opening means that your unit will take reduced damage from that attack. So if it does enough damage to make it so you can still do that 1-2 punch, it's going to be better because it saves life on your unit as well as healing damage from your base. So overall, I actually am fairly optimistic about this card. 3 cost for 2 damage is below curve, but it has substantial upside, I think, with the power debuff and the healing. So I think, we'll have to see how it goes, but could be quite a solid card, I think. I personally have slotted this into some decks already, and I'm hoping to use it to hold back the aggro tides, which we are currently seeing. Yeah, another thing I'll say is that Vigilance can often remove a unit and also heal the base, and it's great. Now, to be fair, it can remove a unit. It's a better removal card, and it heals more damage from the base, and it also has other options, but it's also more expensive. I think this might end up being big. We'll have to see. But at least in an aggro meta, cards that can potentially be both removal and healing are appealing to me. So, okay, let's move on to the next card. Devotion. 2 cost upgrade, +1/+1. Attached unit gains restore 2. When this unit attacks, heal 2 damage from its controller's base. So this is really interesting. And this is one of the cards that I'm most uncertain about from these reveals. Now, obviously, I'm not certain about any of these things. All of this requires testing. We haven't seen the full card pool. I could easily be wrong in these evaluations. But this one is especially curious to me because as a 2 cost, attached unit gains restore 2. When this unit attacks, heal 2 damage from its controller's base. Um, what do we think about this? So honestly, this could be really good in some situations. So let's say that let's say again, there's an aggro situation. Your opponent and you are in mostly different arenas, but you play devotion on an early unit, and all of a sudden you're going to be able to restore a lot of HP if you keep attacking. Your opponent might have to remove it or spend attacks on it uh, in ways that's going to slow down their aggression. It could end up being really good. Now, the downside that I see to this is that at 2 cost, so you could play. Let's say that what you really want is a healing card against aggression in particular. You could play Repair, 1 cost to just heal 3 damage. So if you have Repair instead of Devotion, it costs less. It heals 3 damage. You can use it to heal 3 damage from base. Occasionally you'll play it on a unit, but most of the time I think that's going to be used on the base. And it's just like a lot more basic. There's fewer hoops to jump through, and the opponent doesn't really get the chance to like interact with it. Yeah, they could play like Del Miko to make it more expensive, but they don't get a chance to remove your unit or to use upgrade removal, which some aggro decks do have. Disabling Fang Fighter sees play in some aggro decks, as does Bamboozle. Both of those are upgrade removals. You could also see Waylay, bounce the unit, you lose the upgrade, various exhaust effects, making the Restore 2 less reliable than the direct healing from Repair. Additionally, +1/+1 is nice to have, but it's not enough of a stat boost for you to want to play this for the stats. You're really, I think, only playing this if you want to have Restore. If you want the stats, there's cards like Academy Training, Entrenched, Luke's Lightsaber, Jedi Lightsaber. There are a bunch of cards that are at a similar price point and give you much better stats. So right now, this one seems like it's sort of in between two things. It's in between the stats and the restore. I personally think that it's going to be better if you want to have a card that is giving you extra restore to run repair or something like that. I could be wrong though. The upside of this card is a lot higher than repair. So it's possible that actually in practice this is going to prove a lot stronger, and I do want to test with it. Right now, I'm a little skeptical, but I think it's worth testing and could prove to be strong. Okay, next up we have the Cargo Juggernaut, 6 cost 4/6 vehicle tank. This is the first unit to have the tank type. Um, it is also not a tank by Earth standards. It is a wheeled vehicle, but we're gonna ignore that. We're gonna we're not gonna get into the debate about what is or isn't a tank, but it is the first unit to have this trait, which doesn't currently do anything, but might in future. We could see units like the some of the Trade Federation hover tanks. We could see, like, the AAT or whatever. We could see the Gav Occupier tank from Rogue One. There are more units that could have the tank trait, and we might even see things that synergize with it in the future. So it is a 4/6. 6 for 4/6 is below the curve, but it has shielded. When you play this unit, give a shield token to it. That makes it way tougher than it would be otherwise. So that's actually very strong in terms of its defensive stats. When played, if you control another vigilance unit, heal 4 damage from your base. This is a nice. So this is like, you play this, you get a unit that is very resilient. It doesn't have very efficient offense, but it's very resilient because not only do you get 6 HP, you also get a shield. And then you also heal your base if you control another vigilance unit. So this seems like the purpose of this sort of thing is that you're staving off aggression and like playing a big unit. So the problem with this is that 6 for a 4/6 shielded doesn't immediately impact the board. It's just like I threw down this big unit. Yes, it allows you to heal. But if this were 6 for 4/6 Sentinel instead of shielded, it would be way better, and I think actually conceivably really strong. As it stands against aggro, you don't really want to be playing big units that don't immediately impact the board, especially not big units that are focused on being resilient. I don't think that's really what you want necessarily. I don't know. I mean, I guess it can take out a bunch of small units pretty effectively, but it just like it's very slow to do that. So, maybe thematically, given that it's a juggernaut and it's like this big slow tank, it's not going to be a very effective unit at responding to a bunch of small guys, just because it's expensive. But in some cases, the healing from it will be what you need to stabilize. I think this card looks a lot better in limited formats, where you're potentially the games are less likely to be super fast. You're more likely to be able to play this in a way that stabilizes you and gets a powerful unit for trading with opponents. I think it could be quite reasonable in limited if you have a lot of blue in your deck. You do have to have another blue unit, which is a downside. But I don't know. I think this can be good value if you play this, heal your base, and then get to make various attacks with it into opposing units or their base, and it's difficult to kill. That is like a pretty good scenario. How likely are you going to get that scenario in constructed play? I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to be all that reliable. Also doesn't have the rebel or imperial traits, which are nice to have. But it's not terrible. If you are getting that full value, you get a significant heal on your base, and you get a big dumb unit that can clash with your opponent's units and maybe do some serious damage. So I don't know. I would say pretty reasonable. Pretty reasonable at least for limited. Doubt it will see a ton of play in constructed. For 6 you could also be playing Obi-Wan Kenobi, so 6 for a 4/6 Sentinel with upside. So you could also be playing Academy Defense Walker if you're villainy 6 for a 5/5 Sentinel with upside. And I think having a big Sentinel is going to be probably better than a big shielded unit plus healing. Even on the other hand, there are cards that counter Sentinels, and we haven't seen anti-healing yet. So I don't know. I right now I think it's going to be much more used in limited than constructed. If it does end up seeing some constructed play, I wouldn't be totally shocked though. It is pretty good value. I just think it's a little slow for what the meta is currently looking like. And it doesn't have not having rebel or imperial traits also is a limiting factor. But I don't know. We could see it potentially. We could see it. Um, yeah, I think a pretty decent expensive card for limited. Probably not going to see as much play in constructed, but we'll have to see. All right, and then last, I believe, of the new cards. So I'm not previewing. They did also preview a bunch of bases that are the other generic bases with like different themes. I'm not previewing those because they don't have new gameplay text, but they have cool art. I'm gonna play Chopper base instead of Administrator's Tower for my Sabine deck. It's thematic, but yeah. So next up we have the ATST Suppressor. Last and probably not least, but not amazing. And so 8 cost, 8/8. I think this is basically on curve. The curve kind of breaks down for really expensive stuff. Imperial Vehicle Walker, Vigilance Villainy. When played, exhaust all ground units. Okay, so basically you can play this unit and exhaust all ground units, and it sort of stabilizes the ground arena. If you were in trouble in the ground arena, you play this unit. Not only do you buy yourself a turn because nothing else in that arena can attack this turn, unless they have ready effects or ambush units or whatever. But additionally, you have a big unit to fight in that arena in future turns. I think that's, I don't know. I mean, it's not terrible. It's the problem that I have with this is that 8 is really slow. So if you're facing like a Leia aggro deck and they have a bunch of small ground units and are attacking you and causing a bunch of problems, you play your AT-AT suppressor and exhaust all of them. Yeah, so like the dream is like, you're being swarmed on the ground, you have control of space, you play the AT-AT suppressor, it exhausts their ground units, then next turn you play overwhelming barrage and you have 10 damage to split across all those units and you do devastating damage, wipe their board, and you've won the game. It's awesome. And that is really high upside in theory. The problem is it costs 8. 8 is really, 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 really expensive. Really expensive, like crazily expensive. Um, if you're playing against a Leia Weenie aggro deck, you're probably dead before you get to 8 resources, or you've already stabilized and don't need this. Um, I don't know. I don't love it. I I could be wrong. The effect's really splashy, so exhausting all ground units. But like compare this to Emperor Palpatine. So Emperor Palpatine. So instead of being an 8/8, Emperor Palpatine is a 6/6 with Overwhelm. But when Emperor Palpatine is played, he deals 6 damage divided as you choose among enemy units. I think that will often actually be more impactful than exhausting all ground units. It doesn't hit your side, so this exhaust all ground units does apply to your own units, which is a downside. And Palpatine can also hit things in space. And yes, he has worse stats, but like 8/8 is sort of overkill to some degree. 6/6 is often good enough. And he has overwhelm. So if you're using him to deal with if you're using him to deal with some of those units after like any survivors or whatever, he will actually maybe push some damage to the base as well. Compared to Palpatine, I think this looks really unfavorable. And at 8 cost, you really need to be like a huge bomb type unit to have a big effect. Yeah, it will see play sometimes, I bet. Like, you might have this, especially in limited, might have this as like a top of the curve type unit in limited, and it isn't terrible, but do I love it? No, I don't love it, to be honest. I think it's a little clunky. I think it's a little expensive. Yeah, it's big and scary in principle, but I think cards like Emperor Palpatine are at the same cost point and have a much better effect, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Okay, so those were the 12 newly previewed cards. So the Bounty Hunter Crew, Power Failure, Jedi Agitator, Strike True, Traitorous, Mercenary Company, Steadfast Battalion, Mon Mothma, Make an Opening, Devotion, Cargo Juggernaut, and the AT-ET Suppressor, not AT-ST Suppressor. If you wanted me to rank these cards, let's do top 3 and bottom 3. Number 1 is probably Traitorous. I think that card is going to be really good, and I think it's going to see really widespread play. Number 2 and 3 for me are probably make an opening, or probably strike true before make an opening and then make an opening. I think both of those add removal, which a lot of decks are currently missing. I think they're going to be important cards. And then bottom 3, I would say Jedi Agitator might be one of the worst. I think this is really, the base stats are just really bad for what you get. Yeah, the ability is good, but I don't think you're going to be able to get the use out of that ability very often, given both that this unit is really weak defensively and you have to have a leader unit to get that value. Power Failure, I think, would also probably be in my bottom 3. I think it compares really unfavorably to Disabling Fang Fighter. I was hoping this effect would cost 0 or 1. At 2, I don't think that it's going to make it unless we see a really upgrade heavy meta. And then probably the other bottom 3 card would actually be that AT-ST Suppressor. I could see if Devotion ends up not panning out in testing, I could see it being really bad. But right now, I think I'm more pessimistic about AT Suppressor than I am about Devotion. I keep thinking it's AT-ST Suppressor. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts on the 12 new card reveals from Fantasy Flight Games' recent drafting stream. So, feel free to argue with me in the comments below if you think that I've got these evaluations wrong. You think there's strong use or combo or synergy with some of these cards that I haven't seen. But I thought this might be an interesting thing to do, and yeah, that is the preview review there. Let me know what you think. Let me know also if you'd like to see more content like this. I could easily be doing more card review stuff on the channel. I've mostly been focused on gameplay. I do want to be doing more card reviews once we get closer to release, but if you want to see me do more frequent spoiler reviews and stuff like that, just let me know. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thanks to y'all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.